Hello and welcome to Face to Face. Today we are going to be talking to Bruce Hallsor. We're talking about a very important subject, the subject of a referendum that's going to be taking place in May on the same day as the upcoming provincial election. And the referendum will give us, the people of British Columbia, a chance to vote on changing the way we elect people. In other words, a new voting system. The system that we will vote on is called S.T.V, which is Single Transferable Vote. And today we're talking to Victoria lawyer Bruce Hallsor. Bruce is on the board of an organization called British Columbians for BC S.T.V, Single Transferable Vote. He was co-chair of the Yes side the last time we did this, which was 4 years ago, on the day of the last provincial election when BC S.T.V actually won and was supported by 57% of voters. But Premier Campbell said in a very unusual and unprecedented way that it had to get 60% support, and so it failed even though it passed. Bruce is also past president of the Victoria Bar Association. Am I correct in all of that?
Yes, you are.
So, Bruce, maybe you can just start off by telling us where we are right now with the upcoming referendum.
Sure, Jack. I mean, as you just mentioned, we have a referendum coming up in May. As we sit here today in early February, we're just a few months away. All British Columbians, when they go to vote in the next provincial election, they will have a ballot for their local candidate for MLA, as they usually do, and they will be given a second ballot, which will have a question on it. Which electoral system do you support? The current first-past-the-post system or the new BC S.T.V system proposed by the Citizens' Assembly for Electoral Reform? Last time around, just about 58% of British Columbians supported S.T.V over the current system. The ballot question has changed a little bit. Some of the referendum rules have changed a little bit, but we're back at it, and we want British Columbians to learn about S.T.V and to learn about first past the post as well, so that they can make an informed choice.
Now, first past the post is the name of the system that we currently use, and I think that your feeling is that there's a lot of problems with first past the post. Maybe you can talk a little bit about some of those.
I think after every election, I hear people say, and I read editorials in newspapers saying, oh, there's something wrong with the way elections happen in Canada. And this is not just a British Columbia problem. We have declining voter turnout. We have an increased negative campaigning. We have an antagonistic electoral system. And we also get strange results on election day. We have these intense periods of campaigns where parties sling mud at each other to try and get some small advantage. And sometimes a swing of 2 or 3% in the popular vote from the last election can swing 50% of the seats. And you end up with legislatures that don't reflect what voters voted for. And you often see editorials about this after elections. Some party, we had an election in BC 2 elections ago where one party got 42%, another got 39%. But the 39% party won a majority of seats and had a majority government.
So one party got 49% of the vote, and the other party got 39% of the vote here in BC.
Yeah.
And the party that got 39% of the vote still won a majority government.
The loser won and the winner lost. And that's really what started this whole system. And that's not just an anomaly. In 3 provinces in the 1990s, and once in a decade earlier in the federal election, the party that got more votes got less seats. And the party that got fewer votes, fewer people picked, actually formed the government under our system. And the reason why that happens is, with some frequency, is because our system of first past the post is not designed to be proportional. It's not designed to be representative of actual voters, but it simply represents who can get one more vote than somebody else in a bunch of ridings. So if in one part of the province a political party is very popular and racks up big surpluses, those votes are all wasted. Whereas in another part of the province where the votes might be tight but support another party, those votes aren't wasted, and it leads to a disproportional system with very strange outcomes.
I want to follow up on what you're saying about wasting your vote, because my vote is basically wasted every election. And it's gotten to the point where really I can say, why bother voting? Because I always vote for the losing party or for a losing party. My vote goes from place to place, but my party always loses. And what that means is that I may have just as well stayed at home and not voted, because I knew beforehand that nothing's going to come of my vote. But in a proportional system, or in the system we're talking about today, which is Single Transferable Vote, S.T.V, my vote will count for something, and everybody's vote will count for something, which is a big step forward.
Yeah, the issue of wasted votes is a big one for voters. And it's not just people who might vote for losing parties. People who vote for winning parties, their votes are wasted too, particularly in our system. For most people, and I would say in excess of 80% of people, probably in excess of 90% of people, the individual vote has no real impact on an election. People understand that. Most people go and vote out of a sense of civic duty, and they should, and I'd encourage that. But most people understand, just from reading newspapers and seeing television commentaries during elections, that their vote doesn't matter. You know, you sit down with political commentators and they show you a map of the province and they say, well, these are the safe Liberal seats and these are the safe New Democrat seats. And everybody will focus on a dozen seats, maybe a few more, maybe a few less, that are actually considered to be toss-ups. And if you happen to live in one of the vast majority of seats, which are safe seats, the election really doesn't matter. 9 times out of 10, a BC Liberal is going to win in the safe BC Liberal seats, in the Okanagan, in the North Shore or west side of Vancouver. Those are Liberal, Fraser Valley, those are Liberal areas, and everybody knows it, and the political parties know it. They put resources into it appropriately. And the same thing with strong NDP areas, Lower Vancouver Island for the most part, east side of Vancouver. People expect the NDP to win. All the commentators expect them to win. The NDP expect to win. The BC Liberals expect to win. Expect the NDP to win in those areas. And if you're a voter, even if you're an NDP voter in East Vancouver, or even if you're a BC Liberal voter in Chilliwack, whether you go to the polls or not doesn't matter. The media tells you that it doesn't matter. You're in an area where it's preordained who's going to win. In fact, for most voters, in most ridings, election day doesn't matter at all. What really matters in terms of electing an MLA is the nomination meeting that the dominant political party had in their area. So, you know, you were mentioning off the air, you live in Oak Bay. Most of the time...
No, I live in the Oak Bay
Oak Bay riding.
The Oak Bay Gordon Head riding. I'm outside of Oak Bay.
Most of that riding is one that sometimes goes NDP, but most of the time it goes to the center right. And what matters in that riding is the nomination meeting. You have an incumbent BC Liberal member there. As long as that person is popular within the BC Liberal Party and the BC Liberal Party leadership has confidence in that person, they will probably win the nomination and they will be your MLA. And if you happen to live in Victoria Swan Lake, the new riding that basically looks like Victoria Hillside, it's going to be an NDP riding. Everybody knows it. And whoever wins the NDP nomination in that riding is going to be the MLA. So if you're an ordinary voter, even if you're an NDP supporter who lives in that NDP riding, whether you vote or not makes no difference. It might matter if you are a party member who goes to the nomination meeting, but that's about it.
Another issue is the idea of voting strategically, which we're told to do at every election. We won't have to do that anymore once we move to a proportional system, which will be, I think, very good for everybody. And I'd just like to mention a couple of things that happened in the last federal election that shows the problems that arise with first past the post. One was that the Green Party got, I think, close to 1 million votes, and yet didn't elect one person in the election. So 1 million voters, or close to 1 million voters, go totally unrepresented. In Alberta, on the other hand, the Conservatives got about 800,000 votes and elected, I think, 20 or 25 MPs. So you can see that that votes don't count the same way. And that's a real problem, because why should 1 million people who voted Green not have anyone Green? It's a loss for the party, it's a loss for the country. Also in Toronto, and I think in Toronto, the Conservatives did very well. They got a lot of votes, but elected nobody. Those voters, again, go unrepresented. So there are a lot of real problems with the old system.
Well, Jack, you know, an electoral system, when you think about it, is really just a mathematical formula that's designed to translate everybody's votes into representation in the legislature. There's 4 million British Columbians. There's 80-odd seats in the legislature. We've got a way to get those 4 million opinions represented in the legislature. Our system does a lousy job. Clearly, it does a bad job for smaller parties because they're completely shut out, but it does a bad job for bigger parties because it creates wrong winners. It gives hugely false majorities. I mean, the BC Liberals did win a real majority of votes in the 2001 election, but they got every seat but 2 in the legislature. We had no effective opposition in this province for 4 years. That's not what people voted for. The system needs a change.
So let's start talking about S.T.V. Now, S.T.V. also isn't perfect, but I think a case can be made that it's a step towards a fairer and more democratic voting system. And I think that's what I want. That's what almost 58% of BCers said they wanted when they voted for it in the last referendum. Do you want to talk a bit about the Citizens' Assembly and how they got us to where we are?
Yeah, I think it's really important to talk about the Citizens' Assembly because it's a real unique experiment that has now been copied in other jurisdictions. It's a way of taking politics out of problems that, we need to have a look at our voting system. Most people, I think, would agree that politicians are not the people who should be making up the rules under which they govern. Voters should do that. And the best way to do that was to create a Citizens' Assembly, a group of people essentially chosen randomly from all the communities across the province who dedicated every second weekend for a year to studying electoral systems. And they were asked to answer 2 questions. They were asked, first of all, is our existing electoral system working for British Columbians? Yes or no? And they weren't given any guidance. They could have answered yes. They studied that and they said no. And then they were asked, well, what would you recommend in its place? And they looked around the world. They looked at lots of different electoral systems that are out there. And they chose S.T.V. for a couple of reasons. It solves a lot of the problems with proportionality, wrong winners, exaggerated majorities that people had trouble with. But what the Citizens' Assembly members also found when they went out around the province is that, yeah, those proportionality and things are issues for people involved in politics. But what concerns voters more is that they don't feel like anybody represents them. They don't feel like they matter to politicians. The Citizens' Assembly found that people still want to have local representation. They want to have, people want to vote for somebody who's going to represent their region in the legislature, but they also want to vote for people who are going to come back and listen to them. And you've heard, I'm sure as I have for years, people talk about, in this country we elect dictatorships, especially when we have majority governments. We elect people who go off and sit for 4 years in a legislature and do whatever they want, and there's no check and balance on their power. They don't have to listen to local people, and as we just discussed, a lot of that is because of our single-member ridings. If I'm the MLA for an area, and I want to be the MLA after the next election, all I really have to be is the nominee for the right party. So I've got to make sure while I'm an MLA that I'm going along with things in my party and voting the way I'm supposed to vote. And if there's an issue where my clearly local opinion is contrary on that issue to what my party is doing, I have to side with my party. I can't become a traitor or an independent, or I won't be an MLA anymore. But the Citizens' Assembly said, well, we want to have a system where there's more pressure on MLAs from citizens and less from party whips and party leaders. And they found that in S.T.V. They found a system where if I'm a BC Liberal supporter in a BC Liberal area, I will be able to choose among several BC Liberal candidates. And if I'm a New Democrat supporter in a New Democrat area, I'm not going to be stuck with whoever the incumbent is. I can choose another New Democrat if I like. Or if I support a different party, I've got a chance of electing somebody. Or if I'm an independent voter and I like the BC Liberals, but I really like a Green or an NDP candidate who's running this time, I'd have a chance to express my vote that way. And the Citizens Assembly said, look, we've got to give more control to voters, give them more ability to express their choice, and give them more ability to hold the feet to the fire of their elected representatives. And that's why they chose S.T.V.
You're watching Face to Face. Today we're talking to a local lawyer, Bruce Hallsor, and we're talking about the referendum that will take place in May. We will all get a chance to vote on whether or not we want to move to a new voting system called S.T.V. It's a proportional system. S.T.V means Single Transferable Vote. Bruce is on the board of the group that is supporting S.T.V. That sounds pretty good in terms of people's vote counting and having a chance to choose who you're going to vote for. So in other words, well, maybe we can talk about exactly how S.T.V works. Here in Victoria, we've got 7 ridings.
Right now we have 7 first past the post constituencies.
So
under S.T.V, we would have 1 constituency electing 7 members. Same representation, but the vote will go a little bit differently.
Okay, so we will move from a city that has 7 ridings where I in Oak Bay Gordon Head elect somebody and somebody in Victoria Hillside elect somebody else and so on through the 7 ridings. And now we're going to be in a situation where there is 1 big riding that will elect 7 people. And how many votes do I get?
Well, you get a single vote. It's a single transferable vote system. But your vote may be transferred to make sure that it's useful to you and it's not being wasted. And this is how it works. Essentially, everybody will go and they will be able to, if they want to, just like they do now, vote for 1 person. They can just mark a 1 or an X and vote for 1 person. In a riding with 7 members, the quota to get elected will be 1/8 of the total number of votes cast plus 1. So if anybody who gets on first preference is 1/8 of the vote, 12.5% of the votes cast in a 7-member riding will be elected. Now, you may vote for somebody who doesn't get 1/8 of the vote, or you might vote for somebody who gets more than 1/8 of the vote. That's where the transfers come in. If you choose to just vote for that 1 person, you look at all the candidates and you say, the only person I like is Bruce Hallsor. I don't care for anybody else. Well, you're welcome to still mark an X or a check or a 1 for me if you want to do that, Jack. And that's fine. But if you say, well, if Bruce doesn't make it, or if Bruce has more votes than he needs, you can express a second preference. And in that case, a portion of your vote can go somewhere else. So let's say I'm not very popular at all. And out of the 20 candidates running in Greater Victoria, I'm dead last. I'm 20th. Well, in that case, I didn't need your vote, and your vote will go to your second preference. So, and that person may get elected. Let's say the opposite happens. I'm very popular.
Well, let's follow up on that one a little bit.
Sure.
Okay, so let's say I vote for Bruce first and Jack second.
Sure. So on the first
you
count,
come in 20th. You're the
I come in
absolute dead
20th.
last.
I
So
only have 1 vote.
Right.
It was yours.
So my vote then is taken away from Bruce and given over to
Your second
Jack.
preference, Jack. Okay. Now let's say Jack was 1 vote shy of getting 12.5%. And so we take off the bottom candidate, redistribute his votes. We look at your ballot. Oh, it goes to Jack. You've hit that magic 12.5%. You're declared an elected person.
I think I kind of like this because what is happening is that the people who, it really does, the votes kind of swing over on second or third or fourth transfer to people who are close to being elected, if that's who I voted for, and it puts them over the top. So they just have to get.
That's right. It means that everybody's vote counts. And what you can have in first past the post is you can have 10 candidates in a single member riding. And if all of them get 9.9% and one candidate gets 11%, that person's declared elected. Now, 89% of people didn't vote for that person, and yet they are the sole representative of that person for 4 years. The transferable ballot works into a fair majority because everybody who gets elected actually meets that minimum representation. You're getting, you are representing somebody. If everyone on the first pass on the S.T.V ballot, nobody gets that quota, nobody gets the 12.5%, well, then you start taking off the people at the bottom and you add their votes, and eventually people will get up and they'll pass that threshold and they'll get declared elected. And they'll be elected with actual substantial support in proportion to the size of the riding, rather than getting elected on a fluke, which does happen under first past the post.
Let's go back to I think it was the 2001 election, where the Liberals actually got more than 50% of the vote. They got about 56%?
That's right.
Okay, so 2001 election, the Liberals got 56% of the vote, but they elected
97% of the legislature.
77 people elected out of 79.
Right.
Now, under a single transferable voting system, with 56% of the vote, they would have gotten close to 56% of the seat. Maybe they would have gotten 41 or 42. The NDP would have gotten 30 or something like that. And the Greens probably would have elected a few people as well, and maybe even a smaller party. So in other words, and that is what the way people actually voted. They only gave the Liberals 56% of the vote, but the Liberals got 77 seats.
In a 7-member riding, you have to get 12.5% to get elected. The chances are, in a riding like that, the Greens in that election would have got 12.5% or more than that in Victoria.
So they would have elected at least one person.
They would have elected at least one, and maybe on transfers too. But even in parts of the province where they might not have elected one person, their voters would have had a reason to vote, because after voting Green, if their vote was wasted, they could have used their second preference to choose somebody else. Now, some Green voters might choose a BC Liberal candidate, and some might choose a New Democrat candidate second. But we certainly would have had a fair distribution of votes between the major parties, because the second preferences of smaller party supporters would matter.
I've never thought of that. But yeah, so in other words, in the smaller ridings up north, for example, there's only going to be two, maybe, so it's not very
There's two examples in the province where there was such a large geography that they decided there should only be a 2-member riding. You're not going to achieve great proportionality that way, but you're still going to give voters a reason to vote.
That's right, because if you wanted to vote Green, you could come out and vote Green as your first vote. The Green is going to lose probably in those ridings, but then your second vote, be it Liberal or NDP, would still count fully. So it would allow you to do what you wanted, plus do what you think is going to make more sense politically as well.
That's right.
How proportional?
I should tell you, there's a second step to that counting process, and I'd be remiss if I didn't go into it. There are also people who are going to be very popular and are going to beat that 12.5%. If I was super popular and I got 25% in a 7-member riding, there wouldn't be enough votes left for everyone else to get to their quota. So after we redistribute the votes of people who vote for less popular people, we also can redistribute surplus votes of the most popular. So if I needed to have 10,000 votes, but I got 20,000 votes, once we're finished redistributing the votes of people who are knocked out because they have no chance of getting to the quota, then we'll also redistribute my surplus votes. That's a little bit more complicated because it's a fraction. In this example that I just gave you, I got twice as many votes as I needed. So I only needed half of your vote that time, Jack. And so half of your vote is going to go to your second preference. So instead of me getting 20,000 votes, I've got 10, I'm declared elected, I'm finished. You'll go and look at all my ballots again, and you'll distribute half a vote to each one of my second preferences. So your vote for me that I didn't need because I got too many, half of that vote will go to Jack, and Jack's vote on the second ballot will go up by half a vote for every person who had a second preference for Jack. So that's another way that it happens. So from the bottom you take votes, but also if you happen to support somebody who's very popular, your vote isn't isn't wasted in supporting that person either. It will go until we get 8 or 7 people that have that quota.
Now, people say in arguing against S.T.V that it's a very complex system. The counting is very complex and probably needs computer programming or at least somebody who knows what they're doing to count the votes. But the voting is very simple. You go and you vote once, or you can vote several times depending on your area.
No question about it. You're going to have to go through several counts, and you can do it manually. I think it might be smarter to do it by a computer, but there's a paper ballot, and you can certainly do it manually, and it'll take a while. But for voters who aren't in the back room after the election counting, it's pretty simple. And in fact, I would argue it's a simpler decision to make than it is under the current system. Under the current system, if you support a party that's not supposed to win in your riding, then you're faced with this decision. Well, do I vote for the candidate who I want to? Or do I have to vote for somebody else because I think they might have a chance of winning and beating somebody who I don't like? That becomes a complicated decision, and people often get it wrong. It makes it very frustrating for the voter because they're not sure what to do. In this S.T.V system, it's really simple. Let's say you're an NDP supporter, but you happen to personally know a BC Liberal candidate or an independent candidate or a Green candidate, and you like them. You don't have to make that tough decision between candidate or party. You can vote for both. Or let's say you're a Green supporter in an area where there's not much support, and you want to vote for Green, you want to give them that vote and that support, but now you feel you're wasting your time to do so, and you have that struggle. Well, this time it's easy. You can vote 1, 2, 3 for Green candidates, and you can vote 4, 5, 6 for BC Liberal or whoever your second preference is. It's very simple for the voter to do that. It does give voters a lot more power too, because you get to pick which BC Liberal is your first choice and which one is your third choice. If you only want to vote for BC Liberals, that's fine, but you get to pick which one is going to get the highest vote from you and which one is going to get the lowest vote. So if you have an MLA who is of the party you like, but you don't like that MLA because they haven't represented you well, they'll be your number 7 BC Liberal instead of your number 1 BC Liberal. And you can have that satisfaction as well.
So then, in other words, the 5 or 6 Liberal candidates who would be running would be also running against each other in terms of popularity to all Liberal voters, and the same with the NDPs and Greens.
It's kind of like how it works in municipal elections when you get informal slates or formal slates in some places of people running together, but also running against each other and trying to be the more popular person on their slate.
I'd like to give another concrete example of the way this works. In the U.S. presidential election, back when George Bush was elected the first time, there was a lot of criticism of Ralph Nader, who ran I think he ran for the Green Party, and he got a few % of the votes. And a lot of people said, well, Al Gore lost because Ralph Nader took those votes. Whether that's true or not, under an S.T.V system, it absolutely wouldn't matter. Somebody like Ralph Nader could run. He would lose, as he of course did, and then his votes, your second choice, which might be Al Gore, would swing over to Al Gore. So the fact that Ralph Nader runs would have, you could vote for who you wanted, and then know that your vote still would go to who you knew had a chance to win. So it makes sense in a lot of ways.
That U.S. presidential election is another example of a wrong winner, where more people voted for Al Gore. But because of the electoral college system, which is a first-past-the-post based system, you elected the guy who got fewer votes.
Are there areas of the world where S.T.V is currently used? And we should mention again that there are many, many different kinds of proportional voting systems. S.T.V is one of them.
That's right. S.T.V was invented actually by J.S. Mill in 19th century Britain, and it's been seen sort of as a proportional system that's compatible with our British parliamentary system. So the places that have it tend to be places in the Commonwealth. It's used at a national level in Malta and Ireland. It's also used in Australia's Senate elections. It's used at regional levels in Northern Ireland and Scotland and in New Zealand. And it's been used municipally in various places around the world. It's actually been used municipally in Canada and the United States historically, in the 20s and 30s, and in some different municipalities as well.
It's an argument against S.T.V. that it is, if it's so good, why doesn't anybody use it? And they always say that, well, it's only used in Malta and, did you say Northern Ireland?
The Irish Republic uses it and has since the 1920s.
But those are only the federal levels. There are many other
Well,
elections.
it's interesting. In most places, politicians pick what electoral systems they use. In Ireland, the politicians hate S.T.V. They've tried to get rid of it twice. They've held referendums to get rid of it. Every time the voters have rejected that, they like it. Politicians don't really like S.T.V. because it means their feet get held to the fire. They don't have safe seats. If you're a politician, you want to get a safe seat, and then you can basically be there for as long as you want. There's no such thing as a safe seat in S.T.V. And politicians don't like it. Politicians like list proportional systems better because if they can work their way up to the top of the list, they're pretty secure. They like first past the post because if they can get a good safe seat, they're fairly secure. Of all the electoral systems, S.T.V. is the least friendly to people that want to be career politicians. Political careers tend to be short.
I hate to say it, but I can't think of a better reason for voting for S.T.V. than that.
So, it's interesting because if you look at the Constitution of our country or the Constitution of our province, it talks in great detail about how many MLAs will elect, how you make up ridings, what powers they have, what limits they have. But it doesn't actually say, we have no law that says, no constitutional provision that says how we elect people. It's just an assumption that we use first past the post. It's not actually a constitutional mechanism. It was something that they used in Britain because it had evolved since medieval times, and we adopted it, and nobody ever gave it any thought. And first past the post, in a system where you elected people not based on population and where only a handful of people even had the vote, and you didn't have political parties, it was probably okay. In those days, we called ridings because they would just measure them by how long it took you to ride a horse across an area, and they'd call that a riding. It's like using a sort of semaphore code system in the internet age. We have evolved as a society. People are literate. People are engaged in the political debate. People expect their government to be responsive to them. People understand what legislation is. Why wouldn't we change our voting system? The voting system we have has been around for hundreds of years and basically has not evolved. It's time to look at a change.
You're watching Face to Face. We're talking to Bruce Hallsor, who is involved in one of the groups involved in the referendum that will be coming up in May of this year on the day of our next provincial election. You, the citizens of British Columbia, will have the chance to vote either to keep our current voting system called first past the post or to change to one of the proportional voting systems called Single Transferable Vote, or S.T.V. Very important situation when people actually get to vote on what we as a province are going to do. So get informed as you're doing today. Get informed about both sides of the issue and cast your ballot wisely on that day. Bruce, the last thing I'd like to talk about is some of the arguments that are made against S.T.V. I'm sure you know what they all are. I don't know which one you want to start with. Maybe MMP is better?
Well,
MMP is simply another...
As we discussed, there's a lot of different voting systems out there. And when I got involved in pushing for electoral reform, it was because I didn't like first past the post, and I thought there was something better. I wasn't particularly sold on S.T.V. as the system, and if in my perfect world I was to design my own electoral system, I might change it a little bit from what's on the ballot. But the reality is, we have a unique opportunity to change our electoral system, and if we don't do it this time, the chances are that we'll never have this kind of opportunity again. Politicians have a vested interest in supporting the system that got them elected. When the NDP was in government, in this province, they certainly made no mention of changing the electoral system, and I don't think there's any reasonable expectation they would. The BC Liberals set up the Citizens Assembly, but a lot of the power brokers in that party would be quite happy for this to lose and would be and to go on their merry way. I don't think there's any appetite among major parties for electoral reform. Anybody who thinks that by voting down S.T.V. we'll get another Citizens Assembly and another chance to vote for some other system is crazy. Quite frankly, the only way that we're going to change the electoral system in this province in our generation is to vote yes this May for BC S.T.V. And if we've changed the system once, it certainly becomes easier for people who want to tweak the system or amend it or change it down the road to make an argument to do that. But if British Columbians don't change it, I don't see it changing anytime soon. I don't think there's a whole lot of point in debating the merits of the 30 different electoral systems that are out there. There's 2 on the ballot, and the question is, which one do you prefer? First past the post with all of its flaws, or S.T.V., which answers a lot of those flaws and certainly is subject to some criticism itself, but I think is immeasurably better.
The argument is that you don't know your own MLA under the S.T.V. system. So who do you go to if you've got a problem or an issue that requires the help of an elected representative? For example, I live in Oak Bay Gordon Head area, riding. So supposedly, if I have an issue where I want help from my elected representative, I go to Ida Chong. What do you do under the S.T.V. system?
One of the reasons the Citizens Assembly picked S.T.V. is because they wanted people to have geographic representation. You know, you look at the city of Vancouver, and people don't even know what their riding is. Is it they live in Vancouver Kingsway or Vancouver Point Grey or Vancouver Centre? These ridings are demarcated by streets that change all the time in redistributions. People belong to Vancouver. They are going to elect MLAs that represent the west side of Vancouver or the east side of Vancouver or Burnaby or Greater Victoria. You're still going to have MLAs in the legislature who represent you. The difference in S.T.V. is you're going to have more of them, and the chances are you're going to have at least one, and probably more than one, who not only represent your region, but represent your point of view. So you're going to have real representation, not just tokenism.
So in other words, if I'm not happy with my own MLA, I can simply go down to another area of town where there's an MLA who I happen to agree with more, and they will be my representative, and they'll be happy to represent me.
They will be your own MLA, because your MLA will represent your entire region. And really, that's what MLAs do now. The artificial divisions that we have under first past the post don't work for most people. You know, I happen to live in Saanich South. My office is downtown Victoria. I'm involved in my community across Greater Victoria. I know people who live all over the place, and I don't know the guy who lives 3 houses from me, because that's the kind of society we're in now. And the community that I belong to is a certain community of people who maybe go to my church or work at my office or are on my son's soccer team, and they can live all over. My community is that, and it's part of Greater Victoria. And I don't think I'll lose local representation by having 7 MLAs instead of just 1 that I can go to. I think I will gain local representation.
Another argument against S.T.V. is that the ballot is complex. There's going to be, for example, when I go to vote in the provincial election, there may be 8 or 10 names on the ballot, but there's the 3 parties. And usually I'm choosing between I'm choosing between the 3 major parties. Is that a valid argument, that the ballot is complex? There'll be a lot of people running, you won't know who to choose?
Well, in theory, the ballots will be longer, and no question about it. In a riding with 7 members to be elected, you're going to have a ballot with probably 20 candidates on it. Whereas now you probably have a ballot with 5 or 6 candidates, sometimes up to 8 or 10. But the measure of complicated is how hard that is for people. If you look at places that use S.T.V. and you look at how many, the percentage of ballots that are spoiled, they're virtually identical to what we have now. So there's certainly no reason to think British Columbians can't figure out to pick candidates out of a longer list rather than a shorter list. I think British Columbians are smart enough for that, and voters in other places that use S.T.V figure that out. You will have a longer list. It'll look more like what you're used to in your municipal election than what you're used to in your provincial election. But people manage to vote in municipal elections just fine. And I don't think that the argument that British Columbians aren't sophisticated enough to pick out of a longer list is really going to work or resonate with people.
The last argument I heard about S.T.V is that it's more difficult for an independent to run. It costs more. You have to run in a larger area. Just a simple mail out will be more money than maybe an independent even has. So how do you deal with that argument that it's more difficult for independents to successfully run?
I mean, I find that almost the most laughable argument against S.T.V because how many independents are in the legislature now? How many times do you ever see an independent get elected under the current system? All these people who cry out for independence. The reality is, in Ireland, which has used S.T.V since the 20s, they elect independents in every election. If there is somebody who's got a strong, is well known in a broader community, they can get elected as an independent under S.T.V. You know, a well-known person who speaks to a lot of people in a nonpartisan way can conceivably get 12.5% of the vote in Greater Victoria and get elected. They're not going to get a party nomination if they're not part of a party structure. And only people who win party nominations really win under first past the post. Independents come around maybe once in a generation. In Ireland, they happen once every election, and quite often more than that.
You know, it's funny because I heard that argument made on the radio that it would be more difficult for an independent to run, and it really resonated for me. And I thought, oh, that's terrible. But of course, what you say is absolutely correct, and I know it. You know, independents never win under the current system.
You know, look at the people who are behind the No campaign. They are all people who have worked in the legislature or been close to it. They're either retired politicians, current or retired political aides. They're people who have used the current system and they know it and they like it. And look at their messaging. They're not actually trying to defend the current system. They're just trying to put out negative things about S.T.V. There really is no good argument for first past the post. Most people will admit that. The only real issue is, do you want to take this opportunity for change? A change that has been supported by citizens but opposed by politicians. People have to decide which side they're on.
Can you give me the website again?
Sure. People can find more information at our website, www.stv.ca. But I think, and I encourage people to do that research. They should go to our site, and there's other sites you'll find. Once people know about First Past the Post and about S.T.V, I'm confident they'll choose S.T.V. But there's one more thing they should know if they're unsure. And they should know about the origins of how we got this system. We got this system because it was recommended by citizens independent of politics. These people weren't constitutional advisors or politicians or lawyers even. They were ordinary voters who were randomly selected, and they spent a year studying electoral systems with no axes to grind. At the end of that year, 90% of them, more than 90% of them, rejected First Past the Post. They said it was antiquated. It didn't meet the needs of British Columbians. Then they looked at other electoral systems that are out there, and more than 80% of them voted at the end to recommend S.T.V. I think that's an important mandate for people to look at, and they should look at the advice they got from their fellow citizens.
We've been talking to Bruce Hallsor. We've been talking about the vote that's upcoming in May on whether or not to change our voting system. Try to get informed on both sides of the story. I'm sure it's, if you Google First Past the Post British Columbia, how does one get in touch with the other side?
They have a site called nostv.ca.
Is that N-O? Or?
N-O.
So nostv.ca will give you the other.
I know they don't try to promote First Past the Post. They just, but it's no S.T.V. But that's okay.
Well, no, that's a valid point. They're criticizing S.T.V. but not really talking about the benefits of First Past the Post because they are limited. They are limited. Once again, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.